Huh? They spent 4 months agreeing on item 2. How many items are there? 6. And the plan is to agree to the rest in 30 days? Really? Yeah, good luck with that. Okay. November 25th, 1951. If there are no active battles going on, the troops can take time to relax, right? What do they have to worry about? Well, for starters, tens of thousands of guerrilla soldiers to their rear. I'm Indy Nidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, there was some progress made in the truce talks regarding where a demarcation line should be set, though there are those out there who seem to maybe not want there to be a truce. You know who does want one, though? The men on the ground doing the fighting. There is no official action going on in the field at this moment, but there's still plenty of stuff going on. There are training programs, like U.S. 2nd Division has one near Kapyong. It's a 1-week course for replacement officers. The recent battles have pretty well shown that small unit tactics and basic weapon instruction are the current weaknesses of that division. Actually, some elements of 2nd Division have been diverted south, where guerrilla activity is on the rise once again. See, last September, when the UN forces broke out of the Pusan perimeter and chased the KPA, the North Koreans, northward, as many as 25,000 North Korean soldiers were neither captured, killed, nor made it home. And they are in the hills of the south and have made contact with and work with the already established guerrillas there. There have already been 2 ROK South Korean divisions doing counterinsurgency work in the south for the past year, but they've never really solved the issue. While the great majority of South Koreans were loyal to the Syngman-rhee government, elements in the mountainous south continued in armed opposition with the support of some of the peasantry. Because of this support and the broken terrain, where each valley remained almost a world to itself, the survivors of the NKPA and the guerrillas melted into the population. They were seemingly peaceful agriculturists by day, becoming armed marauders by night. And they do some damage. They shoot up UN convoys, they pick off individual soldiers, and pretty much daily they attack the hospital trains between Pusan and Daegu, which is pretty grim. What they'll do is get close to the rails at night, set up a machine gun, wait for a lit-up hospital train with patients strapped into beds, and then machine gun it, disassemble the gun, and disappear, all in a minute or two. Of course, there are UN railway patrols and flat cars with soldiers and guns and sentry posts, but that isn't enough to stop it. It isn't going to affect the course of the war, but it is an issue, and it's a pretty harsh way to die as well. Well, most of the ways to die are harsh in Korea at the moment. Speaking of the dead, last week I mentioned the publication of sensational headlines in the Associated Press that the communists had killed thousands of American POWs. I've talked a lot about POWs recently and likely will in the weeks to come, but I'd like to address last week's reports. How accurate are the numbers? Colonel Hanley's story the 14th was that the communists have killed 5,500 American and 290 other Allied POWs. 2 days later, he revised his numbers to 6,200 Americans, 7,000 South Koreans, and 130 other Allied prisoners, for a total of 13,400. Then this week, on the 20th, Ridgway says it's possible that 6,000 missing in action American soldiers might have been killed, but there's proof of only 365. Well, what he actually says is, of the 10,836 persons still carried as missing in action, there is no conclusive proof as to the number of the dead, though there is considerable evidence to justify a presumption of death by atrocity of a large number, which may approximate 6,000. Neither the fact nor the manner of death in individual cases has yet to be established. Ridgway, who is Matt Ridgway, UN Forces Commander, will say a couple days from now, spoiler, that figures on the killings of POWs are subject to constant re-evaluation. Douglas MacArthur, remember him? Mac made reports every other week when he was UN commander, and he placed the number of Americans killed up to last November as 400 and South Koreans as 25,000. This is remarkably similar to Ridgway's known tally of 365 Americans. The 25,000 South Koreans is way more than Hanley's figure, though, but to Mac, it's info from a year ago. On top of that, Ridgway's report says most of those men killed were by North Koreans, and Hanley's report says by the Chinese. Hanley was the chief of the Judge Advocate section of 8th Army, which had responsibility for compiling and investigating all atrocities and other war crimes. He had at his disposal all the specific information there was on such incidents. But his formal written statement, unlike his 2 oral statements, contains no figure at all on the number of atrocities committed by the North Koreans before the Chinese entered the war. It is possible that they may soon exit the war, or at least stop actively fighting. The proposal the UN delegates gave to the communists last week accepts the communist stance on the line of demarcation, a demilitarized zone along current line of contact, but adds a 30-day time limit to conclude all the other items on the negotiations agenda. Otherwise, it's invalid. It seems that after a few days of questions, the communist delegates are nearly satisfied with this arrangement. The 21st, they agree in principle, though they haggle about form and language. However, still they held out for UNC agreement that the line of demarcation would not be revised until after the other agenda items were settled. Although the expiration of the 30-day limit, without the conclusion of a truce, would witness the termination of the line of demarcation's validity, the psychological effect of placing it along the existing line of contact might carry over into the post-30-day period. This causes some hesitation on the UN side, but they do actually accept. So by the 23rd, staff officers on both sides are hard at work tracing out the battle lines. In some places, that's easier said than done, and disputes over who controls what territory are referred to sub-delegations. But you still get situations like this one. Both sides claim a certain hill in the center of the peninsula. General Henry Hodes, in General Fang She's presence, calls the unit commander on that hill and confirms the UN side controls the hill. She accepts, but is annoyed and whispers to an aide in Chinese, "Never mind, it will be ours tonight." This is overheard by a UN interpreter, and he tells Hodes later on, so the unit on the hill is on the alert for a night attack. The attack comes, but despite being prepared, the UN forces are driven from the hill. So Hodes has to admit the next day that he no longer has the hill, and they adjust the line of contact. The details have not yet been finalized when the week ends. Ridgway, meanwhile, orders U.S. 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet to set the Army to active defense, meaning that Van Fleet is allowed to take territory suitable for effective defense, but offensive actions are limited to taking only outpost positions that require no more than 1 division. Setting a demarcation line is item 2 of the agenda. But what has been going on with item 3? Ridgway's instructions on this item are specific. They stated that the Military Armistice Commission and its observer teams must have free and unlimited access to all of Korea so that they could inspect whenever necessary to ensure compliance with the terms of the armistice. Ridgway said that there should be no reinforcing the number of personnel or increasing the amount of war equipment during the armistice period. This does not mean, though, that people and units cannot be replaced on a person-to-person basis, a person-for-person basis, or that worn-out or damaged equipment cannot be replaced. In other words, they want the right to inspection and the right to replacement, but not augmentation. This is the UN approach to item 3 on the agenda. Already back on August 1st, UN Chief Delegate Turner Joy suggested that along with no augmentation, there should also be no construction of airfields nor their rehabilitation. In early October, Ridgway had a few things to say about unlimited inspection. He told the Joint Chiefs of Staff that since the other side was cool with UN inspections in the DMZ, but was very much opposed to inspections or even observation in territory under their control, Ridgway wondered if they really needed an unlimited inspection. In fact, insisting on it might cause the communists to break off negotiations. His opinion is that inspection at ports, airports, and a few ground points of entry into North Korea would be enough for his forces to feel secure. He feels, furthermore, that the other side would really exploit the right to unlimited inspection, should it be agreed upon, especially with regards to intelligence. So why give it to them? He thinks the UN position should be joint teams inspecting ground, air, and sea points of entry into the Korean Peninsula and communications hubs. And those teams should have free movement along main transportation routes, joint aerial and photographic recon over the whole Korean Peninsula, and complete joint observation for the whole DMZ. The joint part being the key thing here. He's even willing, though, to concede aerial reconnaissance. The Joint Chiefs eventually think this sounds, pretty good. Eventually. Though the Air Force does say that it is strongly opposed to aerial observation of the South and thinks the communists might want to dispense with ground observation teams. So now that, as it seems, Item 2 discussions are drawing to a close, U.S. Army Chief of Staff Lightning Joe Collins has doubts about all this. He's become convinced the real deterrent to hostilities resuming at some point after an armistice would be the UN maintenance of a lot of force in Korea and not inspections. However, the communist side really might break off talks over that. But Collins and his Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans, Chuck Bolte, wonder if inspection would really guarantee security for UN command, and importantly, how such inspections could actually be carried out. Ridgway answers him this week on the 23rd, reaffirming his earlier stand. He points out that enemy air power has been increasing, challenging the UN further south, and if enemy bases are set up in North Korea and maintained, they would be a major threat to Japan in the event of war with the Soviet Union. For Ridgway, the principle of inspection, which the United States had been insisting upon since the initiation of negotiations with the USSR in 1946 over the control of atomic energy, was a basic U.S. position and could not be discarded in Korea without having an adverse reaction upon future negotiations with the USSR. Ridgway thinks that having 40 joint teams would suffice, especially if some of them were permanently located at points of entry and others were roving. And if the communist delegation will not accept inspections, the UN delegates should be authorized to break off negotiations. It suddenly occurs to me that you guys might not remember all the points on the agenda. The revised agenda was agreed upon July 26 and contains the following items as written by Ridgway to the Joint Chiefs. 1. Adoption of agenda. 2. Fixing a military demarcation line between both sides so as to establish a demilitarized zone as a basic condition for a cessation of hostilities in Korea. 3. Concrete arrangements for the realization of ceasefire and armistice in Korea, including the composition, authority, and functions of a supervising organization for carrying out the terms of a ceasefire and armistice. 4. Arrangements relating to prisoners of war. 5. Recommendations to the governments of the countries concerned on both sides. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of the week. With guerrilla warfare in the South, the POW issue becoming ever more thorny, a possible breakthrough in the talks regarding Item 2 on the agenda, but still a few more items to cover. But let's keep in mind, should there be a truce, there are still thousands of guerrilla fighters in the South. It seems to me they would still remain active despite the truce, though I suppose after any truce, more resources would be spent to hunt them down. Imagine being on one of those hospital trains. You were in battle at Heartbreak Ridge. Most of your company was wiped out, and you saw the horror of that. Your company wiped out hundreds of the enemy, and you saw the horror of that. You got maybe shot in the leg badly enough that it had to be amputated. So they're sending you home, first on a hospital train, and it gets machine gunned, and you get killed. Far from the front lines. You can't win. Hey, that could be the motto for this whole war. The Korean War. You can't win. But you out there, you can win. You can be a winner by joining the Time Ghost Army. It's nothing but winners, trust me. Winners who make sure that we can keep doing all of this magnificence. And you can join at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers, Army officers, and Steve-O Martin is the Army Member of the Week. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.